College football's big three lies. Let me ask you something. If someone you trusted was lying to your face, would you want to know about it? Some people would rather remain in the dark. If I know our audience, like I think I do, though, you guys would want to know. And here's the thing. They're lying to you. A lot of folks out there are lying to you, but here's the worst news. Being lied to is bad enough, but when I tell you, it's not just the casuals. There are a lot of TV types lying to you, even up to and including executives out there of major networks that are integral in delivering college football to you. They're lying to you. Folks sitting in studios, they've been lying to you. And here's the worst part. Even some coaches out there who should absolutely know better have been lying to you. Luckily for you, snitches sometimes are the heroes, and I am happy to be that snitch tonight. College football's big three lies. Let's line them up. And I told producer Jesse, as I got to the building today, it may be that we're missing some. It may be that this list ends up at like college football's 5 big lies. But I got 3 of them that I really want to hammer home. And I want you, as we get into spring and then we eventually get to the 2022 college football season, which I am told will get here in due time, listen for these. You will hear them constantly, and once I list them, you'll know you've already heard them a lot. But maybe you've repeated them, just in good faith, but you just repeated them because you heard them. Let's dive in. Let's talk about these big lies. Let's walk them through to a logical conclusion. College football, big lie number 1. You are what your record says you are. You are not, in college football, what your record says you are. This is a byproduct, quite frankly, of allowing the Sunday crew to come into our house and set Saturday narratives. And I'm not a big fan of using the word narrative, but there is no other usage I could apply here. It's something that's said around pro football, something that's said around the NFL, and it's accurate. You are absolutely what your record says you are. I want to say it was Bill Parcells that used to say it all the time, and he's right. You are what your record says you are. Why is that the case in the NFL? Well, it's because the playing field is so relatively leveled out compared to the Saturday game that the competition level week in and week out is close to equal enough where the record is the best indicator of how good a team is. But in college football, that's not remotely the case. And yet, people say it all the time. I almost feel like these are common sense points and I shouldn't have to address them, but I want you to think about the Arkansas Razorbacks. We're going to talk about Arkansas a little bit later in the show, but I want you to think about Arkansas for just a second with me. Arkansas went 9-4 last year. Now, I thought it was a really good year. Keep in mind, they played both participants in the eventual national championship game. They played Georgia, they played Bama, so that's 2 of the losses. They were 9-4, counting the bowl game. 8-4 regular season, 9-4 counting the bowl game. What kind of season is that? Because I don't look at Arkansas and say that's a 4-loss team, because that assumes this congruency across the whole landscape of college football, which there is not. This is not like looking across Kansas. This is like looking across Colorado. There are vast differences in strength of schedule in this sport. And it's not even Power 5 to G5 to FCS. Dude, some of the bottom of Power 5 is trash. In fact, I would argue a lot of the top of G5 is long since bypassed some of the bottom of Power 5. But think about this through to a logical conclusion for just a second. Arkansas, 9-4, okay? Louisiana Lafayette, and I don't want to bang on Louisiana. I'm strictly using this as sort of a counter data point within the greater context of college football. You got Arkansas at 9-4. You got Louisiana 13-1. So what do we have? We got a 1-loss team and a 4-loss team. Well, which team is better? In the NFL, we've got our answer there. But you got to dive a lot deeper here. And here's what I mean by that. This is not to mean Louisiana's not a bad team or not a good team. They're a very good team. But Arkansas played 8 teams that would be favored over number 2 through 9 on Louisiana's schedule. That sounds really weird and complicated. Well, here's what happened. They had a mutual opponent, Texas. Arkansas played Texas, they scalded them. Louisiana played Texas, they got scalded. Okay? So let's remove Texas. If you take the next 8 best teams on Louisiana's schedule, take the next 8, okay? Arkansas played 8 teams that would be favored over the next best team on Louisiana's schedule. Now, that doesn't speak necessarily to the quality of those teams. I could have just I could have pulled the LA Rams down and had them play Louisiana's schedule. Well, they'd still be the Rams. They'd still be good. So it's not the end-all, be-all. But what you would have some people tell you is, I know everything I need to know by looking at these teams' records. No, you don't. Not in college football. So point number one, big lie number one, you are what your record says you are. College football's second big lie kind of coincides with the first big lie. College football's second big lie is a win is a win. Now, this one really rubs some people the wrong way, because at this point you start talking about the integrity of competition. And we all know you take the field every Saturday or Thursday, whenever you play, to win the game. You know, you play to win the game. Everyone understands that. We all know Herm Edwards. You play to win the game. Yes, you do. So if I'm keeping records for conference standings purposes, a win is indeed a win. But we all know that there's a thick layer of subjectivity in this sport. I mean, we have a playoff that's decided by a committee. And some of you don't like that. But then again, I don't know if it's the worst system in the world, because a lot of people would rather replace that system with something that, quote unquote, allows it to be decided on the field. I'm all for deciding things on the field. But that same crew believes in the big lies. They believe that you are what your record says you are. They believe a win is a win. So let's talk about a win being a win. Again, don't let the Sunday crowd start defining how you should interpret the Saturday game. A win is absolutely a win. I don't care if you are the last place team in the AFC playing the best team in the AFC and you got a 17-point favorite there. If they win by last second field goal, that's all I need to see. A win is a win. But in college football, that is not the case, because we have a lot of subjectivity in this sport. Whether you like it or not, that's the reality. There's a lot of subjectivity. So let's take a hypothetical here. I'm done banging on Louisiana. Let's just take a hypothetical. Let's say Arkansas is a 4-touchdown underdog to Alabama, and Arkansas loses 31-28. They almost won outright. They easily covered. Okay, let's say on the same day, same time, let's say Louisiana Monroe is playing Nicholls State. And let's say Louisiana Monroe's favored by 4 touchdowns. And let's say they win 31-28. So they almost lost as a 4-touchdown favorite. Arkansas almost won as a 4-touchdown dog against Alabama, no less. Who had the more impressive Saturday? Keep in mind that word doesn't matter in the NFL, but in college football it does matter. Who had the more impressive Saturday? Who played better? Who was the better team that day? I would argue Arkansas was. In fact, I would argue if I put Arkansas and UL Monroe on the same field that day, I'd probably heavily lean Arkansas to win the game. But they didn't play the same caliber of competition, and therefore the results were dictated by the caliber of competition. What would you say, though, if someone came up to you and said, none of that matters, all that matters is UL Monroe exited the day 1-0, Arkansas exited the day 0-1, that means UL Monroe had the better day. If that's all the logic it took to understand this sport, then 5-year-olds could figure it out every week and probably get rich on the sport betting it every week. It's not the way it works. Okay, this sport, our sport, college football, it just requires an added level or 2 or 10 of interpretation on what your eyeballs are seeing. It's got to be deeper than that. And if it isn't for you, that's fine. That's your prerogative, and you can choose to watch this game however you want to. I just can't have you anywhere close to designing a playoff format or a selection process. I can't have that. And that leads right into the third big lie in college football. College football's third big lie is going undefeated is the hardest thing to do in this sport. Because it's BS. That's not the hardest thing to do in this sport. You want me to prove it to you right quick? Let me kick you the 2022 schedule. 2022, Auburn University plays Georgia, Alabama, Texas A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, Arkansas. That's just in conference. They also have Penn State coming in for added measure out of conference. Coastal Carolina's hardest game next year is on the road at Virginia. What would impress you more? Auburn going 9-3 or Coastal going 12-0? What is it harder to do? Because I've got a certain portion of the college football public who would tell me, I don't care how many top 10, top 15 caliber teams Auburn plays. If Coastal goes undefeated, that's just the most impressive aspect. Don't care if Auburn goes 10-2 against that schedule. If Coastal goes undefeated, they automatically unlock the door to doing the hardest thing there is to do in sports. That's not the case. It's not the case. Because again, of the volatility from one schedule to another schedule in terms of strength of that schedule. Those are 3 big lies that are continually pushed in your face and perpetuated, again, not by the casuals alone, but sometimes by people, unfortunately, whose voice carries weight. And even up to and including members of, dare I say, the selection committee every now and then. That committee, by the way, people forget sometimes, it rolls over every year. It's not the same 11 or 12 people every year. They cycle folks through. And so I've agreed with the committee's decisions, but I'm always nervous entering every college football season because you never know how many folks are rolling on to the committee who believe in things like you are what your record says you are, and who believe in things like, well, it doesn't matter what the strength of schedule was. If you went undefeated, then it's mandatory. I got to put you in because you did the hardest thing there is to do in sports. Hey, listen, if that were the case, why wouldn't you just remove yourself from a conference, go independent, and schedule a bunch of tomato cans? Knowing that, yeah, people may look at you and say you're ducking competition, but that's okay. Because if the influential powers that be out there tell me, if you go undefeated against those tomato cans, you did the hardest thing there is to do in this sport. It's not true. It's not true that you are what your record says you are. It's certainly not true that a win is just a win. And it's not true that going undefeated is the hardest thing to do in this sport. Now, you want to know why I sometimes push against expansion of the playoff. Well, there's a lot of principle behind it, but then some of the added reasons are because the folks who are advocating for expanding that playoff are doing it because they truly feel that teams have been robbed of their, in their mind, rightful shot at playing for a national championship because they fit some of these parameters, or those people believe in some of these parameters. I don't. So if you want to debate this, that's the short and long of it. That's the beginning and the ending of it. That's where you and I, if you're on the other side of the fence, that's where you and I probably differ on this. If you could convince me, even in the college game, that record is the end-all be-all, if you could convince me rather that a win is just a win, or if you could convince me that going undefeated is the hardest thing to do in this sport, you would have accomplished a Herculean task, because I don't think anyone's convincing me of any of those things.